in the chat. We would love to see and know where everybody's from. My name's Brittany. I am with Tombow, and this is Grace. She is a member of our design team, and she is going to be teaching you guys all about how to use our brand new ABT PRO alcohol-based marker tonight. We're going to be doing some affirmation cards. So we have people here from Las Vegas, Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey. That's awesome. We are so excited to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is Grace, and she is going to teach you guys how to use the new Tombow ABT PRO alcohol-based marker, which is available right now exclusively at Michael's. So Grace, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Sounds good. Hi, you guys. As Brittany said, I'm Grace from Graceann Studio. Goodness, what do I even say about me? I am a wife and mother, and I live in North Texas, born and raised in Texas, but, you know, kind of been all over. I've been on the design team at Tombow for 2 years now. This is my second year, and I've really loved it. Selfishly, one of the things that I love about it is that I get to play with the ABT PRO so much more than I ever dreamed possible, and it's just been really fun. And today I am going to make some affirmation cards, and hopefully you guys can walk along with me and do that. If not, you know, take notes. They're easy. Once you get the gist of it, you'll be able to do it as many times as you want. And hopefully I can save you some of the headaches that I had when I was first learning how to use alcohol markers, because I had plenty of errors. So without any further ado, let's get started learning all about the ABT PRO. Okay, all right. So these are the Tombow ABT PRO alcohol-based markers, as Brittany said, and they are available exclusively at Michael's. They are a dual tip marker, and if you're familiar with Tombow, I'm sure you're familiar with the dual brush pens. So one way that you can differentiate between the ABT PRO and the dual brush pens is ABT PRO has the light gray barrel, and also all of the numbers start, move that up a little closer, start with a P, whereas the dual brush pens, they just start with the number with the exception of the neutrals. So it is also a dual tip pen. It is alcohol-based, meaning that the ink inside is alcohol-based as opposed to the water-based dual brush pens. But it does have the same flexible brush tip that we all know and love in the dual brush pens. It just has alcohol ink in it instead. On the other side is a chisel tip, whereas with the dual brush pens, you would see a bullet tip here or a fine tip. But the chisel tip is really great for filling large areas if you want an even wash of color, or really straight lines or something that's very structured. Whereas the flexible brush tip is great for more organic lines, or this really, the tip of it can get really fine details. So if you're into stamp coloring or anything like that, these can color really intricate stamps. So that's really fun. Let's see, what else can I tell you about the ABT PRO? I think most of the fun with the ABT PRO is learning how to use it and blend it. So let's go ahead and get started with that. These are the cards that we're going to be making later, but first I want to go through a few different steps of how to blend with the ABT PRO. So we'll set those aside for now. All right. One thing that you will notice when you're working with the ABT PRO, but really any alcohol marker, is that they don't pill the paper when you're blending them, but they will bleed through. So whenever you're working with them, make sure that you're using a blotter page behind it to protect your workspace. And also, I guess before we start using these babies, let's talk about paper. So you want to use a paper that is a medium absorbency and is really smooth. So like I said, it has that same flexible brush tip from the dual brush pen, meaning that it is a delicate brush tip, and you want to make sure you're only using a really smooth paper on it. There is actually a blog post with a few specific kinds of paper that work really well with the ABT Pro. And I think Tombow just posted it in the comments. It's called the 5 best papers for the ABT Pro or something like that. But that's from Katie at Studio Katie, and she did a really great job going through that. So if you're looking for specifics, check out that blog post, but really just make sure that it's a smooth surface and medium absorbency. Okay, so let's get started. As we said, we have the flexible brush tip, and this side can do the really thin lines and the nice thick strokes, just like we're used to with the dual brush pens. And then you also have the chisel tip side. And the chisel tip side is nice for doing washes, like I said. I use this one a lot in architectural illustrations whenever I want to show something that is an even wash, or urban sketching, anything like that. I tend to use the chisel tip a little bit more than the flexible brush tip, but it's going to depend on your project which side you use, and luckily there's 2 sides, so it, double the fun. With alcohol markers, as I said, they don't peel the paper the more that you layer. So as of right now, you can see I was actually moving my pen a little bit more quickly than I should have, and it's not a completely even layer yet. Let me put that a little closer to the camera so y'all can maybe see. But you can still see a few of the strokes. So that is one thing to be aware of with the Tombow ABT Pro, is that the ink flow is controlled. And while that's really, really great when you're using the fine tip side and you want to control and not have too much ink come out at one time, it does mean that you got to control yourself also and work very slowly so that the ink can come out at a consistent pace. Okay? However, if you do, like me, and go a little too fast, not a big deal. You can just add on another layer. So I'm going to start over on the left-hand side, and this time I'm very slowly going to go over it. And I'm not going to go all the way to the end because I'd like to show you something else. As you layer the colors, you can create a gradient with just one color. So every time you add the color, more of that color is laid down, or more of the pigment is laid down, and it becomes darker. So you can see this is one layer. Here we have 2 layers. You do want to give it a little bit of time to breathe or to settle into the paper before adding another layer, and that'll just help to really bring out the full extent of the color. So I'm going to go ahead and add a 3rd layer here. Okay, still trying to work slowly. But you can see with the 3rd layer, it's even darker still. Okay, and you could keep adding layers until your paper is totally saturated. You'll see if I flip it over, it's starting to bleed where I went over it so many different times though. So you really want to make sure you have that blotter page ready. So that's a pretty cool thing about the ABT Pro, is that you can create a gradient with just one pen. So I like having that option, especially for monochromatic illustrations. Having a few different shades of, for example, blue is really fun, but I love that you only absolutely have to have one. Next, let's take a look at a couple of other different fills that we can do with just one pen. So again, if you're looking to create just an even wash of color, for example, in coloring, you can use this method. You can also use the circular method, which basically is moving the pen in overlapping circles. So you just, again, are still going to move pretty slowly overall. But you'll notice that as you're laying that color down, it's already overlapping into itself. So it's not going to be as light as that one layer with the chisel tip. It's more like in the 2 to 3 layer range. And that's because the circular motion is really intrinsically layering the ink. And once the ink dries and that the alcohol evaporates and you're left with just the color on the page, it's going to be a really nice, smooth, even layer. Another method you can use for filling or blending is the flicking motion. That's not going to be quite as smooth as one of these. If you want it to be a solid color, I would opt for that. But the flicking motion or the feathering technique is really great for blending. So actually, you know what? I'm going to switch to my green pack and I'll show you how to blend a nice gradient with several different colors. So when you want to create a smooth blend of something or a nice gradient, I like to start with my darkest color first, because you can always go darker, but you can't always go lighter. So I like to start with my darkest color first and then end with my lightest color, because that way I'm not constantly adding to my light, essentially. So to start, we'll start over here on the left-hand side, and I'm going to use the feathering technique or the flicking technique that we talked about. And all you do is you press down and you just kind of flick your brush pen up. Okay, and you just flick it out a little ways, however long you want the gradient to be. And then I'm going to move to my next darkest color, which again, this is the green 5-pack that I started out with, just in case anybody started late. But this is the P177, so that is my second darkest color. And again, I'm going to start right here at the edge, and I'm going to flick a little bit further out. Okay, I'm going to layer right over the dark and just keep flicking. So if you've ever seen any of my dual brush pen classes, you notice that I rotate the pen as I'm flicking or with each stroke. And that's mostly to make sure that as I am working with my pen, I really strive to preserve the tips, because they are so delicate and these pens are so precious. I really want to make sure that I can absolutely get the most out of them. So I try to rotate my pen just a little bit so that it's wearing all the way around. Next, we have P126. That's going to be your middle color. And again, you're going to start on the left-hand side and just flick out past that color. So you're pulling the color out a little bit more every time. I'm going to layer a little bit more there. And then we'll go to our next darkest, or second lightest rather, which is P133. And again, starting at that same spot, flicking a little bit further out. So you'll notice that at this point, your paper is probably getting pretty saturated over in this area. So again, that's why paper choice is so important. You want to make sure that you're using that medium absorbency so that your paper can withstand layering and blending like this, but not so much absorbency that it's just going to suck the ink right out of your pen, right? So watercolor paper, not the best with these because they'll dry your ink out. For the last color, we'll start again on the left-hand side, and again, flick all the way out. And then if you want to close off that blend, start from the left-hand side or the right-hand side and just kind of flick it back in with your lightest color. And you'll notice I'm starting to move a little bit faster, and it's I should slow down so that I get that nice even layer of ink. Now, I saw somebody ask if you should always start with your darkest color, and the answer is no. We're actually going to get it, promise I can talk. We're going to get into a technique here in just a minute where we start with our lightest color and layer over it. But for this gradient technique, I tend to always start with my darkest color. I absolutely encourage all of you to experiment with your own techniques. This happens to be the best way that I work with it, but if you enjoy starting with the lightest color, there is no crime against that. Just try it out and see how it works for you. You know, everybody works a little bit differently, and that's totally fine. This just happens to be the way that I've been able to blend the colors the best. I'll lift that up a little bit closer to the camera so you can see. So you can see as it's a little farther away, it looks like it's a little bit smoother, but up close, you can still see some of those flicks. But again, we can layer those same colors and still achieve darker saturations of it. So I'm going to use my lightest color again, the P131, and again, start on the right side and flick it back in. And you'll see that just gets that layer a little bit smoother and kind of helps to blend everything together. I do tend to use my lighter colors to finish blends, just to make sure that they're really nice and smooth. So I will say that of all of my pens, I use the lighter ones more often just because I'm always using them to kind of finish out that blend and make it a really nice smooth gradient. Okay. So these are a gradient with just one color, but you can also blend two colors that are not in the same color family. And you would use the same technique. But we're going to go through it just so that you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to blend my blues and my lighter greens together. So again, I'm going to start with my darkest colors because I want to create that nice smooth gradient. So I'm going to start with P452. And we'll just start here on the left-hand side and again, flick it a little ways. And then you'll move to your lighter blue, which is P451. And you're going to use the same technique that you did here. Again, start at the left-hand side and flick slightly past that. You can go over with a lighter color a few times if you want to really smooth out the flicks there. You can see the more layers that I add, the smoother that blend becomes. So the trick for blending two colors that are not in the same color family is to start on the opposite side and blend in. And then you, again, use your lighter colors to blend them together. So I'm going to start with my darker light green, which is P133. And again, just layer down that first layer of darker green. And then I'll take my lighter green, which is P131, start all the way on the right-hand side. And this time I'm going to flick it a little bit past that center line so that the tips of my flick are overlapping from the light blue and the light green. So we're just going to blend that back into each other. And you can see here, when you layer those different colors, they actually create their own colors. So when you're layering that blue or the green over the blue, it's creating this really lovely blue-green, right? So as you're layering these colors, keep in mind how the colors are going to mix based on the color wheel. And then again, we can go back over with the light blue to blend it together a little bit more. Just barely though, because that blue is a little bit stronger than my green. All right. And there is our gradient with two color families. All right, does anybody have any questions before I go on to starting the affirmation cards? All right, awesome. I will take that as a no. And, oh, here, look, you can see how much it's bleeding through where I really layered on the colors there and there. Okay. All right, so to start our affirmation cards, the first thing that we want to do is get your cards. And we're going to sketch out our plant in a pencil. Okay? So bringing it back to these, as we're sketching them, the general shape of the leaf is going to, it's a fiddle leaf fig plant, and the general shape of the leaf is going to start kind of with a curved bottom, and then it expands out basically in a rounded triangle, and then you can vary it just by adding another little kind of curve up or another little triangle to change the shape of the leaf. And these cards are 3 inches by 4 inches. I made them to be affirmation cards that you can just use some washi tape or something and stick them up on the mirror. I personally really liked the idea of growth with this. So we'll start out with the I can, and that is going to have just kind of our little baby plant. Maybe we just brought it home from the nursery and planted it and haven't really had a chance to take root yet. And then every time, or on every card, we'll add a few more leaves to represent growth, literally. So there we go. I actually cut these cards from my paper that I've been using just because I know that these are smooth and they are safe for my brush tips. So if you are wanting to buy cards from somewhere, I would just really be very cautious of whatever the paper actually is. Okay, so let's draw these cuties. Here we go. Can you guys see these? All right, cool. So I'm going to start with I can. And at the very top, we're always going to have this little section of more growth happening, or the little sprig coming up from the top. So I'm going to start there. Actually, strike that and reverse it. I'm going to start with my pot down at the bottom. And we'll just draw a line straight across, and then 2 little lines in and straight down to the bottom. I'm going to add a trivet to the bottom of my pot. You can obviously make yours whatever shape you want, or just as simple as a little semicircle or something. Just a forewarning, I'm going to be moving relatively quickly through sketching these, but we are going to go through coloring one of these really, well, not really slowly, but slowly, so that you guys can keep up. And then it's just repeating the exact same thing for the other ones. So I'm going to draw them pretty quickly, but as long as you can get one card drawn with me, if you are following along, that's all you need. All right, so we've got our pot, and then we'll draw our stem just to kind of keep us in check. And again, I'm going to start at the top with my cute little piece of growth, and then I'm actually going to kind of pop back down to the bottom and start with my bottom leaves and go from there. So my first leaf is going to come off from the corner, and this one's actually, I'm going to change the shape a little bit. There we go. That one's kind of looking a little bit more like a different plant, so I want to keep this true to the fiddle leaf fig. So we'll have that rounded triangle, and then off to the side we have another one. So again, I'm just drawing rounded triangles, and I'm varying them just a tiny bit. This one I'm going to add a little kind of kick up to, or another triangle to show the leaf curving up. And I'll leave these up here, so if I move on and you haven't got a chance to catch up, you'll be able to see the finished ones there if you just are trying to copy my leaves. But really, I mean, it's nature, nothing's perfect. So just make them however you want. All right, so now we have another little baby leaf right up here. Another little part curving up, and then a little skinny leaf. All right, and at this point, less detail is probably more. I would just try to get the general shape in, and then when we start adding in the color and going over it with the mono drawing pens, that's when it's really going to come to life. So just try to block in some general shapes here. Okay, so for the next one, we're moving on to I Will. And again, I'm going to start with the pot down at the bottom. I always tend to try to draw the pot a little bit bigger than I should. So I'm trying to be very conscious of that this time. And it's a little bit taller. And again, our little growth at the top. So we're going to draw these same 4 leaves that we had here, but we're going to make them a little bit bigger. And we'll continue that each time. So our first leaf over here. And our next one. I'm trying to kind of draw off to the side so you guys can see it, but I'm a little out of practice for that. All right. And this time I'm just going to add one more leaf instead of adding a bunch more, because we've got a few more to go through. So we have our 4th leaf, which is our long, skinny, kind of a V. Since it's growing, we'll make it a little bit bigger. And then this one is going to come up from the back. And again, I'm drawing that last line to kind of kick it around. So you can see mine are not looking exactly the same, and that's fine. It's nature. Nothing's ever going to be exactly the same. You just do the best you can. Okay, and then on to our 3rd card. Again, we're going to start with the pot. Straight line across, 2 lines in, and then kind of curve it down to the trivet. And then our stem. Again, drawing that little bit of growth up at the top. And then I'm going to come back down to the bottom, and this time our leaves have grown even more. And instead of having just 5 leaves, we're going to add 2 more to the top. So remember, every time the leaves are going to get a little bit bigger, but they always keep that same general curved triangle shape. So we are at our long skinny one. And if they change a little bit from plant to plant, that's totally fine too. I'm sure mine will also. This one we're going to kind of layer a little bit. So it's behind that 4th leaf. And then we'll have one at the top. And this time I'm going to kind of draw it flopping back over towards us a little bit. All right, and then we always have that bit of growth at the top. On to our 4th one. Again, we're going to start down at the bottom. start with your pot, then draw your stem, and this time I'm going to grow it all the way up to the top so that that growth is just about going off the page. Or actually, I am drawing it off the page. And then back down to the bottom to start with your bottom leaf. And again, it's going to be that curved triangle. And one thing I love about these cards is that you can really make them whatever you want. You know, you could do any kind of a plant you want. So if there's one that's special to you, you know, you absolutely don't have to do one like this. You could be, you know, drawing whatever plant is special to you. And I'll show you an example of another one here in a little bit, but for now, let's just focus on this. Great. And leaf number 4, our long skinny one. That one's growing out a little bit more. And then our 5th leaf, I'm actually going to have it kind of bending backwards now that it's grown a little bit more. And we can maybe add that line here too, so that we remember that on the previous one. Next. And on this one, I'm going to add, again, 2 more leaves to the very top up here. So this is our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th leaf. And then we'll have 2 more and we'll start coloring. So again, this one was overlapping. And we have these 2 up at the top. So these are just going to be 2 little ones. And that one's kind of going off the page too. All right. Actually, I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. So, you know, feel free to do that. Go back and adjust any that you need to, but I think that looks pretty good. You know, we're adding leaves every time, having our plant grow. And now let's get started coloring it. So I'm going to work on just the very last one, which is I am. And the reason for that is, well, time, but also if I'm coloring these all 4 at the same time, I would just be repeating and using the same color on all of them and layering them that way. But for now, let's just focus on just this one. The next thing I'm going to do is use my Mono 0 eraser just to kind of clean up some of the stray lines so that I can tell what is actually supposed to be there. I use this eraser for just about everything, but I love that it is, it can get really fine details in there because a lot of times I'll go through and erase with my just regular mono eraser, and I need something that's a little bit more delicate. So, okay, there we have it. Put the blues away for now. So earlier when we talked about gradients, we started with our darkest color, right? We started dark and worked to light to create a gradient. But you can see this is not exactly a smooth gradient, right? We're just using those, the colors to illustrate illustrate the plant. So I'm going to start with my light and then add shadows after that. So start with your light and then make sure that with every layer of color you're adding, you're leaving a little bit of the previous color. So you can see in the middle here, I left that really light green. we're going to color it all over, but as long as you make sure that you're leaving a little bit of the previous layer, it'll look really good in the end. So to get started, we're going to start with our lightest green in the 5-pack. Where's my camera? There it is. So that's going to be P131. And you're just going to color in every leaf. Okay. That was a mono 0 eraser. It's a Tombow eraser, and if I'm not mistaken, it's available at Michael's as well. All right, so we're just using that lightest green to lay down a base of color. And you're just going to fill in the whole leaf. You're going to do that for everyone. Right now, we're not worried about really separating out the leaves or adding any type of shadow or anything. You're just going to fill them in. All right. So once you have all of the leaves filled in, and you probably noticed, but I used the flexible brush tip side, and that is because there are some really fine little corners that I wanted to make sure that I got into there. So I'm going to be using the brush tip side for this entire project because it is, I mean, the leaves are relatively big, but it's still going to be mostly precision work. Right. Next, we are going to layer on P133, and let me kind of bring this guy over here so you can see a little bit more. So this one, essentially, you're going to be going through and leaving spaces for what is going to be the veins. So kind of imagine the main vein coming down here, and then you have all the little ones coming off of it. So I'm going to kind of fill in a few spaces on every plant. Again, most of this will get covered up on the bottom ones or the bottom leaves, but I'm going to go ahead and add it there anyway, just because I want to leave a little bit showing through just for added interest. So let's see. I'm going to start at the top. So adding a little bit at the top. And again, we're just leaving space for those veins, right? You just make sure that you leave a little bit of the P131 showing through on every leaf. And I'm just using the very, very tip of this pen for that. So it's a very light hand. I am going to kind of hit the edges a little bit and maybe even the back sides some. But I'm still making sure, even on those smallest ones, I'm leaving that, that lightest color there. Okay. So this leaf, it's kind of turned around behind us. So the coloring is going to be a little bit different. And really all of these up at the top, we're going to be seeing the underside. And that side is actually a little bit lighter than the top of the fiddle leaf fig plant, based on my research. So I'm going to keep this one mostly light as well as this one. And then when we get down to the bottom, you'll start seeing that upper side of it. And that's where we'll really start to use our darker colors. So starting at the edges, and again, just kind of filling in. I'm not too much worried about differentiating between leaves yet. I'm just trying to add in that second layer, start at the edges, and kind of work my way back to the middle. We're basically dabbing some colors on there right now. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be pretty. In fact, at this point, it probably isn't super pretty. I mean, it's two colors that are just kind of dabbed on there. But as you keep layering and adding details, it all comes together. right? Again, leaving a little bit of that original color. All right. Next, we'll go to our middle green, which is P126, and we are going to do the same thing. Up at the top, this middle color is pretty much going to be our darkest color. I'm going to come back in and use the next darkest just to really exaggerate some shadows, but for the most part, this color is going to be our shadows up here on the top, the upper leaves. All right, so there would definitely be a shadow here in that little growth area from the plant overlapping. And there's also going to be some on the underside of this plant, or excuse me, of this leaf. And again, we're just filling in where there would be shadows, as well as where there are different dark areas on the plant. Okay, so these leaves are overlapping. So now I'm going to draw a nice little shadow there to show that they are two different leaves. And then I'm going to draw just a few touches on the outside to show, just to show a few shadows. But for the most part, again, this is going to be the back side of the leaf. And so that means that it's going to be a little bit darker. If the light is coming from above, that means this leaf is casting a shadow on the one below it. So I'm adding a little bit of a shadow there. And same thing on the underside. Same thing on the underside of this plant, or excuse me, leaf. And then as we're working down, just keep adding those shadows as the plants are layering, or excuse me, the leaves. Goodness, I promise. I know each leaf is not a plant. So as you're moving your way down, just make sure that you're layering the colors, but again, still leaving those previous layers there. Okay. So these are starting to show the tops of the leaves rather than the bottom. So I'm adding a little bit more of the darker colors here. And again, on our bottom leaves. So leaving very, very little of those original colors there. All right. Moving to P177. I'm going to use this to highlight a couple more shadows to really make them pop up at the top, and then it's going to be the primary color or the dominant color down here for the lower leaves. So I'm going to add one right here where these are overlapping, as well as just to the very back side of this one. Again, I'm using just the very tip just to add a really light shadow, because you can see a little bit goes a long, long way. And I'm trying not to make it just a solid line, just to break it up a little bit more and make it look a little bit lighter. Okay, then we'll move down to the middle of the plant. And we'll use a little bit more of this darker color here. And again, I'm just hitting the outsides of it. Mostly, it's just kind of little dabbing motions, right? It's not anything that's too, nothing that's too fancy. You're just kind of dabbing ink on the page and layering it. That's all it is, just layers. So you can see in most of the areas here, I'm actually covering up most of what was already there, and that's fine. Just make sure you're leaving a little bit of the previous color somewhere on the leaf, just for a little bit of extra interest. And then, you know, at this point, you don't have to copy mine exactly. If you're able to do this along with me, you know, just take a look at yours and see what will make it work. You know, what you may have drawn yours slightly differently than mine, which is totally fine. You just need to make sure that whatever you're adding is working for you. So for this last color, I'm going to use P249, which is the darkest green, and I'm going to start down at the bottom, adding in my final shadows there, and then I'm probably going to come back with a lighter green and work in a little bit more in those upper plants or upper leaves. So again, starting at the very edges, and you can see a little bit goes a long way here. And that's why I'm starting at the bottom, just so that I can not add too much with this one. Trying to get where there would be shadows. As well as where the leaf might be curving in on itself a little bit too. Okay, now I'm gonna go up to the next level and just add a tiny bit of shadow, not much at all. And I don't think I'm gonna put any up at the very top. In fact, I'm going to go back and use P177 again and just add another layer so that these are a little bit darker, but not as dark as adding that next color on. So I do think that these need a little bit more, but they're pretty good. And then you can just keep layering and coloring and, you know, doing what you think works best for your piece. I'm thinking that looks pretty good. We want to try to keep from overdoing it. So that is it for the leaves. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the pot? Yep, we are going to come back in and do the mono drawing pen after. I just want to finish up with all of the ABT Pro first, and then we'll come back and add some veins. All right. So for the pot, obviously you can do this any color you want. My favorite color is blue, so I tend to make everything blue that I can. And we're just going to use that little flicking motion that we learned. So start with your darker blue, which is P452. And I'm actually going to go ahead and fill in the trivet. And then I'm going to start at the bottom and just do a few little flicks up. And then I'm going to, hello. And then I'm going to switch to P451, the lighter blue. And you'll start at the top and just flick that color down to blend it in. I tend to not try to make this a perfectly smooth blend because I like that it looks like it's glazed and handmade a little bit. So I'm actually going to go back over with my darker blue to exaggerate that look a little bit more. And I'm also going to add a shadow that's just right under that lip and then maybe a little bit going down the side. And one more layer on the trivet as well. So just so you can see that up close. You can see it still looks pretty messy, but we're going to come back in with the mono drawing pens. And actually, I'm going to do the stems. I forgot about those. So let's do those, the second lightest green. Let's use P177. Okay. Go down. We'll just do the main stem. And again, I'm just using the very tip of the ABT Pro, and just make sure that every leaf has a stem. Most of them are already connecting, but if there's an area that does need it added, just go through and add it. I'm also going to add a teeny tiny itty bitty baby bit of shadow with the P249, the darkest green, just to the area right below everywhere one of these stems comes into the base of the plant, just to add a teeny tiny bit of variation. So you can see that was not adding a lot, but it definitely added depth rather than just having one color there. Okay, now for the veins. So I'm going to use my mono drawing pen in 02. And for the outlining the leaves and adding the veins, keep in mind that there are not straight lines in nature, and try not to close off every single leaf. If you see what I'm talking about. So over here, you can see I just left it open. I didn't outline it perfectly. And I find that that just gives it a more organic and kind of perfectly imperfect look, which is absolutely my style. There's always something I missed anyway, so I try to just kind of go with the flow and make it look really natural. So you're basically going to start by coloring over the pencil marks. So if we start at the very top, I'm just adding a little bit to every leaf. And this is really going to define it. And then you have your main stem coming up, or excuse me, main vein, and then the little ones coming off from the inside. Same thing here. You may not always be able to see them. And again, none of these lines are perfectly straight. None of them are all connected. But this really just gives you a chance to further define the plant and make it look like the leaves are curving the way that you want them to. So you can really do that with the veins by adding those here. And the reason I'm using the, oops, come back, goodness, the mono drawing pen is because this pen is a water-based ink marker, and the ink does not interact with the alcohol-based ABT Pro. So if you're looking for doing some underdrawings, so for example, if you wanted to draw all of these all of the plants in mono drawing pen first and then come back and add color, you could do that, but you want to make sure you're using it with the right tools. So the mono drawing pen is great to pair with the ABT Pro because it's a water-based pigment ink with the alcohol-based marker. So the inks are different and they're not going to interact with each other. With the caveat that paper makes a huge difference with that as well. Whatever project you're starting, you always want to test your materials with the paper that you're using, because 9 times out of 10, you might have the right pens, but the paper is causing them to act differently. So perhaps it's a paper that's not a medium absorbency, and this water-based pen ink is sitting on top of the page for too long or something. A lot of times the problem is going to be the paper. So don't forget in that, I don't know, in choosing your supplies, that the paper choice makes a big difference there as well. All right, back to drawing. Again, we're just outlining. I'm trying to leave some areas open. I try to pick up my pen to skip lines at times. You can outline the stems if you'd like. I tend to add just a little bit of a touch, but not outline it completely. Again, just kind of the same philosophy as the rest of these. It adds a little something, but sometimes outlining or tracing something completely, at least for my personal style, it ends up looking a little cartoony. So I prefer to just kind of basically skip your pen and let it look a little bit more natural. So on these lower plants or lower leaves, you can really see the difference with adding the mono drawing pen, because you can start to see the definition of the leaves rather than before they were kind of just a big green blob. And then same thing for the pot. I'm going to outline it, but not completely. I'm actually going to leave off the left-hand side. I'll move down a little bit, but then I'm going to leave the rest off just to make it look a little bit incomplete. And then the very last thing to do is just to add your affirmation at the top, and then you would just fill in whatever you're wanting to affirm yourself for. So I'm going to write I am, since this is the very last one. And I'm using the mono drawing pen 08. I don't know if I said that or not. And that's it.
That's awesome, Grace.
Thank you. So like I said, I love that you can do these with any plants that you'd like. I actually did this project with the zinnias as well. And instead of adding leaves every time, I just added a few more flowers and made a few more flowers bloom. So really whatever plant works for you, you can absolutely make that work for this project. All right, that's it from me.
That's awesome. So Grace, we have one person asking if you
Yeah.
can show all of them.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. And for those of you who followed along, we would love to see what you created. If you want to show it up to your camera, we would love to see it. So you might feel like sharing? Oh, yeah.
Yay. Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's awesome. Great job.
I love it.
Yay.
Very nice. Oh my goodness, you guys, those look great. Oh, I love the pink. That's so cute.
That looks so good. Great job, you guys.
Awesome.
Thank y'all so much for joining our class tonight, and thank you to Grace for teaching all about the ABT Pro.
Thanks, you guys. That was so much fun.